a story of how Lakota warriors dominated the American plains. This is a story about strength, struggle, and a spirit that will never be broken. Before America had borders, before the West was won, there were the Lakota, proud, resilient, and free. Their story is not just about survival, but about a people who refused to be conquered. Welcome back, everyone. Today, we're exploring the powerful history of the Lakota Sioux. Make sure you stay with me until the end. I think you will be surprised where the Lakota stand today. Before we dive in, hit that subscribe button if you haven't already, and check my channel for more historical videos. Big thanks to our supporters who make videos like this possible. You all rock. Let's get into it. Who are the Lakota? The word Lakota means friend or ally in their own language. They are one of the three major divisions of the Sioux Nation, along with the Dakota and Nakota, all part of the broader Siouan language family. Historically, the Lakota were a nomadic plains tribe, living in what is now North and South Dakota, Nebraska, and Montana. They were expert horse warriors, buffalo hunters, and survivalists on the vast grasslands. Their homes were teepees, large, cone-shaped dwellings made from wood and buffalo hides, designed to be mobile so they could follow the great herds of bison, which provided food, clothing, tools, and shelter. According to tradition, the Lakota migrated westward to the Black Hills around 1700, and during this time, they were often referred to as the Teton Sioux, or People of the Prairie. Rise of Lakota power. Everything changed when the Lakota gained access to horses, first introduced to the Americas by the Spanish. They either traded for them or acquired them in raids from tribes who had contact with Europeans. With horses, the Lakota's world expanded. By the late 1700s, the Lakota had become a dominant force on the plains, pushing out rival tribes like the Crow, Pawnee, and Shoshone. Great leaders and warriors such as Red Cloud, Crazy Horse, and Sitting Bull emerged, and their reputation as fierce warriors grew. Red Cloud's War and the Fort Laramie Treaty. Between 1866 and 1868, a conflict known as Red Cloud's War broke out. At the heart of the war was the Bozeman Trail. Red Cloud led the resistance, winning key battles, including the Fetterman Fight in 1866, where 81 U.S. soldiers were killed in an ambush. Eventually, the U.S. government signed the Treaty of Fort Laramie in 1868, guaranteeing Lakota control over the Black Hills, a sacred land. The Battle of Little Bighorn. In 1876, U.S. forces under General George Custer encountered a large Lakota and Cheyenne encampment near the Little Bighorn River. Led by Sitting Bull and Crazy Horse, native warriors, estimated between 1,500 and 2,500, overwhelmed Custer's troops in what became known as Custer's Last Stand. But the celebration was short-lived. Within a year, the U.S. government launched a massive retaliation, forcing most Lakota to surrender or be confined to reservations. The Wounded Knee Massacre. On December 29, 1890, U.S. troops surrounded a Lakota group at Wounded Knee Creek in South Dakota. They attempted to disarm them, fearing the Ghost Dance movement. A shot was fired, and the soldiers opened fire, killing more than 250 Lakota. The Ghost Dance, inspired by a prophet named Wovoka, preached peace and the return of native ways. But the U.S. saw it as a threat. Wounded Knee marked the final chapter of the Indian Wars, a brutal symbol of forced assimilation, broken treaties, and cultural erasure. The Lakota today. Many Lakota live on reservations such as Pine Ridge and Rosebud in South Dakota and Standing Rock in North Dakota. Despite hardship, the Lakota are reviving their language, protecting traditions, and fighting for sovereignty and justice. Their story is America's story, and it still rides with the wind across the Great Plains. Beyond their homes and hunting, the Lakota also had a complex system of social organization. Tribes were made up of bands, and each band had its own leadership structure. Decision-making was often collective, with leaders chosen based on merit and respect rather than inheritance alone. The Lakota also held deep spiritual beliefs centered on nature, the land, and their ancestors. Ceremonies like the Sun Dance and Vision Quests were central to their identity, serving as rites of passage and moments of deep connection with the divine. The Lakota's relationship with the buffalo was not just practical, but sacred. They believed the buffalo was a gift from the Creator and held rituals to honor the animal's spirit after a hunt. Their oral tradition passed down stories, values, and teachings through generations. These stories often featured Iktomi, a trickster figure who taught moral lessons through clever, humorous tales. Language, too, was a cornerstone of culture, with rich vocabulary for kinship, the natural world, and spiritual concepts. The introduction of horses didn't just revolutionize transportation, it reshaped their society. Horses became symbols of wealth and prestige. A man's status could often be measured by the size and quality of his herd. Lakota warriors trained from a young age to ride and fight from horseback, and many became expert mounted archers. The Lakota also became skilled diplomats and strategists. They forged alliances with some tribes and went to war with others as needed. Warfare was not always about conquest, but often about honor, defense, and protecting resources. Raids for horses or revenge were common, but full-scale war was rare unless survival was at stake. During this golden age of mobility, the Lakota mapped the plains through memory, landmarks, and oral navigation. They understood the rhythms of the land, the seasons, migrations, and cycles that ensured their survival. This deep ecological knowledge was passed from elders to youth, grounding the community in its environment. Red Cloud was not only a brilliant warrior, but also a shrewd negotiator. He was one of the few Native leaders to win a war against the U.S. government and force them to come to the table. His resistance to the Bozeman Trail was calculated and relentless. Lakota, Cheyenne, and Arapaho forces used hit-and-run tactics to harass military forts and wagon trains, eventually making the route unusable. The Fetterman Fight, where 81 U.S. soldiers were lured into an ambush and killed, shocked the American public and military. It forced the government to reconsider its expansion policy in that region. Red Cloud refused to sign any treaty until the U.S. evacuated all its forts along the trail, which they eventually did. Though the Fort Laramie Treaty was a victory, it was also fragile. As settlers and miners continued westward, pressure on the government to reopen the Black Hills grew. The Lakota knew that their sovereignty was always under threat, no matter what promises were made on paper. The Battle of Little Bighorn was the result of mounting tensions and failed diplomacy. The U.S. had issued an ultimatum for all Lakota to return to their reservations by a set deadline, an unrealistic demand, especially during winter. They were simply defending their way of life. Sitting Bull had foreseen the confrontation in a vision during a sun dance, where he saw soldiers falling into the Lakota camp like grasshoppers. His prophecy inspired confidence among the warriors. Crazy Horse, known for his bravery and tactical brilliance, led one of the flanking attacks during the battle. The defeat of Custer stunned the nation. But while it was a symbolic high point for Native resistance, it also united public opinion against them. The government responded by cutting rations, intensifying military campaigns, and targeting leaders like Sitting Bull and Crazy Horse. Within a year, the vast majority of Lakota had been forced onto reservations. After years of broken promises, cultural suppression, and forced relocations, tensions were high. The Ghost Dance movement spread rapidly in Lakota country because it gave hope, a peaceful vision of a world restored to balance, where buffalo returned, settlers disappeared, and Native peoples thrived once more. But U.S. authorities saw it differently. They feared it would spark rebellion. This fear led to increased surveillance and the arrest of Sitting Bull, who was killed during a skirmish in the process. The situation grew even more volatile. At Wounded Knee, as troops tried to disarm the Lakota, a single gunshot, likely accidental, caused chaos. The soldiers, already on edge, opened fire with rifles and even Hotchkiss guns, small artillery pieces. The massacre that followed lasted just minutes, but claimed hundreds of lives. Afterward, the U.S. awarded medals to some of the soldiers involved, a decision that remains controversial and painful to this day. The site of the massacre has since become a place of mourning, resistance, and remembrance. In the 20th and 21st centuries, the Lakota have continued to resist marginalization. From legal battles over land and treaty rights to environmental activism, their voice has remained strong. The American Indian Movement, AM, of the 1970s brought Lakota issues to national attention, especially after the 1973 occupation of Wounded Knee. Language revitalization programs, traditional schools, and Lakota-run media are helping to preserve their identity. Artists, writers, and filmmakers are telling their own stories, challenging stereotypes, and celebrating culture. Modern struggles include high unemployment, housing shortages, and systemic neglect on many reservations, especially Pine Ridge, one of the poorest regions in the U.S. But amidst these challenges are stories of resilience. Youth programs, cultural camps, and Lakota-led initiatives are creating hope for future generations. Their fight is no longer just about land. It's about truth, representation, and healing. The Lakota continue to shape American history, not just in books, but in courtrooms, classrooms, and on the front lines of justice. Thanks so much for watching this journey through the history of the Lakota Sioux. If you found this story powerful or learned something new, please give this video a like. It really helps more people discover it. And if you enjoy stories like this one, don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss a new video. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Drop a comment below and let me know what part of Lakota history stood out to you the most, or if there's a topic you want us to explore next. Until next time, stay curious, stay respectful, and keep history alive.